So yeah, I think that proves my point that this, that I'm going to share a secret and then I'll get to the actual talk. So this whole thing was actually just one super long con. So I wrote Chef, and then we raised money, and then we sold it to a bunch of customers and did the whole thing. But honestly, it was just so that I could get enough people to fill a rock venue and then throw a rock concert where I got to play guitar. So now that that's done, it's cool, go home, no more Chef. I'm going to Mexico. I made sure my wife was here so she knows we're going to Mexico. Okay, I'm kidding. You still are here. Okay. So don't worry about the title, because hey, you're not even going to see it. If you don't know who I am, you're going to be totally wonder why there were smoke cannons. But I'm CTO at Chef. I wrote Chef when there was nothing. There was like a blank screen and then Chef, but then all of you wrote Chef. So every time I say that I wrote Chef, it's weird, but then people are like, you should say you wrote Chef. So I wrote Chef. I'm a systems administrator, really. Every other thing I've ever done before this, that's what you called me, so I'm pretty sure that's still what I am. If you saw me last night, I'm apparently a guitar player, so that was cool. And I'm a husband and dad. That's my daughter. It's Elizabeth, and she also knows how to rock. Okay. So it's early in the morning, so let's just do like a little limbery thing. Who's a systems administrator? You got to go with me. So much my people. God, I love you guys. Okay, software developer. My favorite part of that, same people, right? Because you keep coming back to the show, and I keep being like, you're actually software developers, and now everybody is like, yeah. Okay, who's an executive? I'm an executive. It's okay to be an executive. There's like 4 of them. Barry Christ. Hi. Yeah, the swearing ruined our sales motion. So who's a musician? Because it's weird that there seems like a lot of you, right? We could have a talent show next year. Okay. So why am I actually here? So I want to talk about the fact that we have this opportunity to redefine how our entire industry works. And I talked about that last year. I'm going to talk about it a little more this year. But more importantly, I think that opportunity gives us tremendous leverage to actually help our peers and the people who follow us doing what we do to be more content, healthier, more whole, happy human beings. I want to talk about why I think that's true. And then I want to propose a lens that we can look through called humane systems automation, that when we think about the systems we build can help us to stay closer to that as an ideal, and try to build systems that are better, safer, and better to run and make more money. So I have to start, though, with a story. So I was at a conference about a conference. It wasn't the actual conference. And someone at that conference, while we were in the middle of sort of an argument, not an argument, we were talking as a bunch of people. And they called me the Malcolm Gladwell of DevOps. Yeah, thanks for the applause. That wasn't a compliment, FYI. And my first reaction was, dude, do you know who I am? I get on stage and my people are raw and they love me, right? And I'm narcissistic enough that it kind of threw me for a loop, and my first reaction was rage. Don't you know how sweet I am? But then, because I'm super sweet, there were smoke cannons, right? I have evidence. But I was sad because, it's hard to have someone say that about you. So then I started actually thinking about it because I'm obsessive, and I was like, man, maybe I am. Am I awful? Am I a total sham? A lot of this talk is about whether or not I'm a total sham. So just get ready for that. So when I thought about Malcolm Gladwell, here's the problem with Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell writes really compelling books like The Tipping Point and Blink and Outliers. And what Malcolm gets is a hunch, right? He's like, I'm pretty sure that social network interconnectivity is the cause of all awesome social memes. So then he goes and finds a bunch of science that validates his point, and then he writes a super compelling book about it, right? And it's awesome. But he maybe cherry picks the science a smidge, right? And so, right? So actual scientists get really mad. They're like, seriously, dude, it doesn't work that way. But the rest of us are like, that book was so awesome, and we go do our thing. So I started thinking about myself. I'm like, okay, so were they right? Am I Malcolm Gladwell? And so the first thing, I started going through all the hunches I'd ever had in my life, right? And so I was 8 when my parents bought, or I don't know, 6 maybe, whatever, something like that, 6 or 8. And we bought a 286, and it had a 2400 baud modem because my mom was a real estate agent and she needed to call into the MLS. And I was pretty sure when I was 8 that the coolest part of that computer was that modem. The fact that I could call another computer, that was jam, right? I'm the OG F-bomb guy, so I get to do that, and it's cool. So that was cool. It worked out. I think how many people in this room thought modems were the coolest part of their computer? right? Because it totally was. Bulletin boards, right? Okay. So I had another hunch when I got a lot older. So the officiant at my wedding, that's my wife. So the officiant at my wedding told this story about how weddings and marriage is a magnificent hunch you have about another person. That you don't know it's going to work out. You're not sure what's going to happen. But you believe, you think, that that person's going to make your life better for the rest of your life, and that through all the very difficult things that will happen to you, that it's going to be worth it, right? And maybe it won't be worth it. You have no idea. But you have this hunch that it's going to be true, so you're willing to jump in, right? And so far, still working, right? I had this hunch about Chef, right? I was like, we need to have a programming language that lets us describe how we deal with infrastructure in the same way we do applications. That hunch, it looks like it paid off, right? I got smoke cannons in a rock concert, so that was cool. Basically, the whole thing is a setup for my adolescent power fantasy. So that's working. See why I thought it should be awesomer? Okay, so I thought heavy metal would be cool, because I liked it. And so when they asked us what should be on the playlist, I threw in some heavy metal, and everybody was like, there was metal. And then there was like so much metal, right? So that's cool. Seems to work. But in the end, I'm not a scientist, right? Those dudes are scientists in our industry. That's John Allspaw and Mark Burgess. Mark Burgess remains the most photogenic of the configuration management founders. Right? Tell me that that is not a good-looking dude. Like, damn, Mark, smolder. Okay, so I love Mark Burgess. That is not, I'm not making fun of him. No lie, he's a beautiful man. So sometimes, you know, the hunches I get are validated by actual scientists, like John and like Mark. But the thing is that I don't actually come to their conclusions that way, right? They actually sit down and they do research. Mark came up with his own fundamental branch of logic in order to come up with promise theory. I was just like, hey, I've built a lot of infrastructure, and I'm pretty sure it works better if each piece of the infrastructure cares about itself. And then Mark validated it with promise theory. And I was like, awesome, what I've been doing all along. And so all of a sudden, what I was doing turned into science. But just so we're clear, I wasn't the science guy, right? I was the builder dude that was like, oh my God, science. So a little bit, I'm Malcolm Gladwell. But if I want to avoid actually being Malcolm Gladwell, not cherry picking my science, rather than dazzle you with the science I could come up with, I could dig for a bunch of social science and a bunch of things that talk about what we do, I'm just going to tell you why I came to believe that that opportunity exists, and why I believe that if we think about it this way, we'll get better outcomes, because I've seen it in my own life. And so I believe that because of 4 things that happened to me in the last year. So one is the experiences I had with continuous delivery and with DevOps. The second was the loss of Mitch Hill, and the arrival of Barry Christ, and my getting to know Barry as a human being. Leading engineering at Chef. I've spent most of my time at Chef out in front of customers. I've always been an engineer, but in the last year, I've stepped back into a role where I'm more involved regularly with the engineering team. And then finally, my wife's a political organizer, and so I hang out with those people, and it sort of bled into my mind about how they affect change in the world. So I'm going to talk about those 4 things real fast. So, continuous delivery. How many people were in this room last year? I'm going to make you raise your hand a lot because it wakes you up. Okay, maybe we could jump. No, I'm kidding. Don't jump. So this will be a bit of a recap, but you're just going to go with it. So 1, continuous delivery is the new customer service, right? What used to happen in retail stores when people were nice to you, now that's shipping software to make their experience better or to fix their problem, right? And DevOps is the movement that happened in IT that enabled that shift. All of us that did web ops, that built websites, we moved that stuff from the back of the office to the front, and we delivered it directly to customers. And that's becoming the ubiquitous model, right? Over time, that's the way people are going to do IT. It's the way that our businesses will be run, and that's the jam. So when I went and did research, I found that all the companies I could find that were good at this shared at least these traits. So 1, they had strong cultures of personal empowerment. They treated failure as a learning opportunity. They had service-oriented architectures. They had an allergy to slow things. They just didn't like it when they were slow. It made them uncomfortable. And they were addicted to data as a problem-solving tool. And what's interesting about those things is that they're all cultural for the most part. They're things that people do, and they're ways that people behave that seem to enable those outcomes. They weren't necessarily technical things, right? The way they implemented it was always different. So what I learned from CD and DevOps is that there's a fundamental change that's happening in the economy. Over time, that change is going to be ubiquitous. I also learned that there's nobody coming to rescue us. There's literally nobody else besides the people in this room who build these systems who know how to do it. And if we don't know how to do it, we're the ones who have to figure it out, because there's no one coming to our rescue. So Barry mentioned the loss of Mitch Hill, and I'm going to do it too. I loved Mitch Hill. I was part of hiring Mitch Hill. And if you've never built a company, I can tell you that it's a very nerve-wracking and hard thing to do. And it's hard to believe in yourself enough to do it, regardless of how much external validation you get. And Mitch Hill, for everybody who knew him, Mitch Hill was like, if Mitch Hill was a boxer, he's Muhammad Ali. And so every time that Mitch does anything, and everybody at his funeral said this, they all had this story, that if Mitch loved whatever you did, you were lit up. Like, you knew that whatever you were doing was better and more right. And I did too. And it turned out that that was so strong and it was so hard to build a company that for me personally, having Mitch in my life meant that it was easier to believe in Chef, and it was easier to believe in the community, and it was easier to believe in what we did. But in some ways it was easier because I believed so strongly in Mitch. And so when he died, I didn't even really realize that, I didn't know how, I didn't realize that I wasn't sure I still believed, right? I wasn't sure that for all the external validation and for all of the things, all the evidence that told me that it was working because of what we believed in, I wasn't sure if it was. Maybe it was only working because there was Mitch, right? And at the same time, see, I'm gonna have to get through without crying, which I'm not gonna do now that I said it. It's gonna make my keynote go on a little extra long. At the same time, it turned out that my job was to help Chef get through that moment, right? The company also believed in Mitch, and it needed to believe in itself again, right? And so my job was to help us believe in ourselves, and that was really, really hard to do. And yeah, I can't tell that part of the story, or I'll just cry. So then what happened was we hired Barry Christ. So Barry was hired as Mitch. We learned Mitch was ill, and he hadn't been there very long. And there's a few things that you probably don't know necessarily about Barry if you haven't had a chance to hang out with him. But one thing is that Barry is a very high-functioning communicator. When Barry walks in a room and he thinks he knows the situation, or he does know the situation, which most of the time he does, he just tells you what he thinks, right? He says, hey, blah, 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 and he's usually right. And the thing about Barry was he joined our company because he believed in us. He believed in us as a team. He believed in open source. He believed in the product. He believed in the opportunity. He believed in the community. He believed in us as people. And he believed that we could be all the things we said we were every day on the tin, right? When we said that we were high-functioning, empowered, awesome people, that we're going to build a great product to take over the world, he believed that not because somebody else told him so. He believed it because he'd seen it for himself. And man, he was ready, and he was all in, and he was going to dig in and make it so. And he just did it effortlessly, right? He didn't have to try to do it. He was like, of course we would do the right thing. Why wouldn't we do the right thing? The right thing's awesome. We'll do the right thing. And so, what I learned from Barry was that I could, if I remembered why I was here, if I just believed, what Mitch believed in was this. He believed in us as a community. He believed in the product. He believed in us as a team, us as human beings. And what Barry reminded me was that was actually the thing that we all believed in. Right? It's actually okay to just say that's what you believe in. It's not that nobody is really literally coming to your rescue, and that it's actually about us as people. And in a very difficult time for me personally, it was Barry Christ who reminded me that what we were was bigger than any single one of us. And thank you for doing it. Well, I'll go back and say one more thing. So the important thing is that you have to remember who you are, and you have to remember it after the day you failed to do it. So I had a couple days where I failed to do it. And what I learned from Barry was that on those days you don't care, you just get back up and you do it again. And I knew that in an operations sense, but now I learned it about what I really thought. So I took over engineering, and I think that's a pretty good summary. But I didn't even get a laugh. It was too heavy. I was really nervous about that whole thing. I was like, I'm gonna do this heavy thing, and I gotta have a funny slide, and then the funny slide, okay, so this is also a funny story, so let's get back to that part. So I was very nervous. As I was saying, I took over, I stepped back in this leadership role, and I was pretty nervous about what I believed, and I was pretty nervous about whether or not it was gonna work, and I was nervous about all these things, and I was trying so hard to pull it off. I wanted so much for everything to work, because I didn't wanna let Mitch down, I didn't wanna let myself down, I didn't wanna let you guys down. And so what I did was I read obsessively about how to run good engineering teams. I did a bunch of research. And then I sat down and I wrote this 30-page long Google Doc that was like, this is how we're gonna do it. This is software development, Chef, it's gonna be so awesome, we're gonna do it. And then I was gonna get all the team leads who run the company, I was gonna pull them together in this offsite, and I was just gonna pummel them with like all the evidence that I had about how we were gonna be awesome, right? And I gave it to Barry, and he read it, and he goes, so that was long. Like, no preamble, no buttering me up first, where I was like, hey, good work, that was a lot of writing. He was just like, that was long, right? To which my reaction was like, oh, F you, like, I've been talking to you about this for 6 months. And he was like, dude, I don't know why you're freaking out right now, because all I said was it was long. But did you notice that in the beginning of your giant tome, you talked about how you wanted to trust and believe in these people, and that through empowering them to go faster and to understand what's going on and to believe in good outcomes, that you would actually get better outcomes. And instead of doing that, what you did was put a 30-page Google Doc together so you could pummel them with your opinion. Something like that. To which I responded, no, right? So now you know what it's like to work with me, so maybe don't. And so then I took his advice. And I boiled it down, and I built a slide deck, and I told the team what I believed would be good outcomes, and I asked them if they believed that those things also made good outcomes. And one of the things that I learned from doing all that research and writing the tome was that really it boils down to this. You have to have a great team who believes in themselves, believes in each other, and are healthy, whole human beings. So if your team is right, if you have the right people and they're healthy humans, if they're bad at home, if it's not right in the rest of their lives, they won't build good things. But if you can build a team that's good, that's awesome. They have a shot at building a great product, and then they have a shot at building a great company. But it's in that order, man. Unhealthy people build unhealthy products, right? Happy people, happy products. Unhappy people, bad products, right? And you can build okay companies on bad products. How many people have seen okay companies on bad products, right? Sometimes even big companies on bad products. I'm not calling anybody out, though. Except maybe that last gen, anyway, okay. So then I learned a few other things. So when I was looking sort of obsessively at engineering teams, and what I learned was that there wasn't like a single methodology that universally worked. What there was sort of three things that everybody had. They always had a mission, right? They had something that was bigger than the software they produced. And this isn't the same as the corporate mission. This is like, why are we building the software we're building? What's the real reason we're doing it? They had a belief in what made great outcomes, and they stuck by them, right? And they were beliefs that were often unique to their problem domain. And then they had an org structure and a process that reinforced it, right? Seems pretty simple, but there seemed to be a lot of examples of where people failed, and it was because they failed to do those things. So a great example of a mission for an engineering team, this is JFK calling the moonshot. So, you know, he was like, we're going to put a man on the moon and bring him home safely before the end of the decade. He was 6 months into 1961, so they were already a year and change short, right? So that's awful. Like, when he announced it, they had already cut time off the clock, right? But if you think about it, if you were a software developer on the Apollo project, every day you went to work, what would you do? You'd be like, is this thing I'm doing going to put a man on the moon and bring him home safely by the end of the decade, yes or no? Right? Super simple. And it worked. So this was ours. This is what we came up with, me and that team in that room, which is our mission as a software development team is to write the software that defines how an entire generation of businesses deliver technology to their customers. That's what we're really doing. We're trying to figure out how we can help you guys go out into the world and figure out how to be great at this thing. That's our job. And then there's some things that we believe, and there's a big list. It's a giant Google Doc that is shared by all of us, and engineers can add new things. We nominated a new one not that long ago. But these are some of the things we believe. We believe that we build software for our users, and we do what's right for them even when it's hard. We're allergic to things that are slow, because, hey, I saw everybody had to be or they would fail. We work together to make better, faster decisions, and we will make mistakes, and when we do that, we learn from those mistakes. We're transparent internally and externally. How many people here had to deal with Heartbleed? Yeah, if your hand didn't go up, it's because you're still vulnerable to Heartbleed. So that's a bummer. But you know, we wrote like 3 or 4 postmortems from our response to Heartbleed within 24 hours of doing the work. That was brutal, right? But it was the right thing to do because we had to be transparent with you about why we were responding, how we felt about our response, where we fell down, how we were going to be better, right? And that's why you can trust us. And then we believe that Chef would exist without the company, right? It was software we wrote, we open sourced it, but the company wouldn't exist without the Chef community, right? So the people we build the software for, they're the reason that the company is there, right? And that's actually a very important thing. We also believe in journey. I got to go for cheap laughs because the rest of the deck's too heavy. So then this was something that I think was super important and really had an impact on me. So Kim Scott and the First Round Capital people posted this amazing blog post. You should go read it. But she talks about a thing called cruel empathy. And so basically you can think about unclear and clear communication, good news and bad news. And if you want to build a high trust, high functioning team, this is a thing Barry Chris models all the time. You have to be super clear about what's going on in your life, when it's good news and when it's bad news. And if you're clear about the bad news all the time, every time, when you give praise when it's good news, people believe you, right? And that's what builds high trust. And what we often wind up doing is giving really unclear feedback when the news is good or bad. And that leads to this really, like everybody knows when that's happening. And it leads to a thing called cruel empathy, which I just love the word, right? Where you're being nice to someone because you know that what you're saying, if you were being honest, would hurt their feelings. So instead, you don't hurt their feelings, so you can fire them in 6 months, right? That sucks. So you have to have a mission that's bigger than yourself. You have to be clear about what you believe. You have to trust other people, and that comes from the little things you do, not big ones. And you have to avoid the cruel empathy quadrant. So political organizers. My wife is a political organizer. That is not my wife. That's Barack Obama. Who is a fine-looking human, and in some states could be my husband. But he's married, so there's things. So am I. It's awkward. But I just didn't want to have 2 slides of my wife because it felt like too much wife. Anyway. She's the director of U.S. campaigns for Change.org. She helped start a thing called Moms Rising, and she's awesome. And one of the things that she does is she talks all day about how to help people solve their problems and change the world. And that tends to seep into your brain eventually. And at some point, this seeped into my brain, which is that if you really want to change something, you have to change 3 things. You have to change what people believe, you have to change the systems by which they work, and you have to change the way that they behave. And so a good example of this is the NAACP. So they changed how separate but equal worked in the Jim Crow South systemically, not by saying that the law was unjust, although they were saying that it was unjust all the time. But the legal argument they made was simply that black schools were not equal to white schools. And they just did it over and over and over again from 1930 to 1960. And next thing you know, they couldn't hold up because the law as written could not be implemented. And that changed the system. And that meant all the people who believed what they did, but still sent their kids to segregated schools, got to behave the way they wanted to, and that's what changed the system, right? Rock on. So from that story, what you can learn is that if you consider your systems in the context of what you believe and how you behave, you can build and change that system to reinforce those beliefs and behaviors. And remember from earlier, we're the only people who can build the system, right? See where I'm going? Okay. So we have an opportunity to redefine how our industry works. The market's pulling us, we're not pushing it. And the skills of us are actually now a thing. We call them web scale IT, that's what Gartner calls it. Gartner had to give a new name to the thing that we do, right? We're winning. That opportunity provides us tremendous leverage, right? If we're intentional about how we build those systems, we can have leverage on what the beliefs and behaviors of the people who use that system are. Other people can talk about it, we're the only ones who can do it. And so that means we have a responsibility to help each other to be better, more content, healthier, whole human beings. We have to remind each other that that's true. We have to remind each other why it's true. And we have to teach each other how to trust each other and to have these high trust, high functioning, high empathy teams and high empathy communities. So how does that become actionable? Because it's just pretty highfalutin. So Thich Nhat Hanh is one of the greatest living Zen masters. He's in his, 80s, almost 90. And he gave a talk at Google where basically he said, when we create electronic devices, they can reflect on whether that new product will take people away from themselves, their family, and their nature. Instead, they can create the kind of devices and software that can help them go back to themselves to take care of their feelings. By doing that, they will feel good because they're doing something good for society. So on that front, I think that if we think about the systems we build through the lens of being humane, that actually can help us to achieve what Thich Nhat Hanh was saying. And that is, the goal of the automation that we build should be to enhance the safety, contentment, knowledge, and freedom of both the authors of that software and the users of that system, right? Safety, contentment, knowledge, and freedom. So let's talk about safety. So obviously this is human safety, right? If we build systems where they're human critical, right, we got to make sure that they work. It's information safety. We got to make sure that what you say about yourself is true and your information is secure. You have to talk about availability because it turns out, like Twitter, it would be easy if you worked at Twitter early on to be like, well, it's okay if it fails because it's not a human critical system, right until there's a war happening and the only open communication path is Twitter, right? And all of a sudden availability really matters, right? So safety is a slider. It goes back and forth between some systems are super critical, some systems are less critical, but in the end, they all have to be safe, both for the people who are using it and the people who run it. So contentment. I didn't use happiness on purpose because happiness is fleeting. You have moments where you're happy, right? I'm happy now. I'm on stage. There's all of my people. But later, I won't be so happy. I'll be tired, and it won't be good. But what I will be the whole time is content. And the reason is I've gotten back to a place where most of my life is in line with what I actually think and actually feel. And that's the sort of thing that we want actually to get people to. Because even during Heartbleed, right, we knew that there was what our response would be. We knew how it would work. I was upset. I wasn't happy. It wasn't my favorite week. But I was content the whole time. So the state of our systems is often a source of deep discontent. And so we got to work to make ourselves more content. It's not about happiness, because sometimes bad things happen, but it is about contentment. And often if you're content, happiness pops out the other side. Knowledge. So access to knowledge is a leading indicator of social progress. If you want the world to get better, people need to know more things and have better access to the knowledge they need. And so when we build these systems, we have to make them easy to understand what the system's for, why we need it, and what make good outcomes, right? And this isn't about minimizing needed knowledge. Sometimes it is. But it's actually about making sure that whatever knowledge you need, you can get when you need it, right? So if you only need high-level knowledge, great. You should have access to the high-level knowledge. If you need low-level knowledge, you've got to be able to get to that low-level knowledge, because anything else we do sort of blocks progress. And like safety, knowledge is a slider. So freedom. This is our ability to act without fear, and the ability to change and do what you need to do. And so if you think about automation as a thing that frees people to act, it helps you make better, safer decisions, and it gives you leverage to change how you work. So what about speed? So we talk a lot about speed, and I believe that speed is super important. If I'm in a sales meeting with you, I'm going to use speed to sell you my software because I think it's a primary value of what we deliver. But I think speed is actually a primary outcome of automation, and it has huge value, but it's not a goal of automation. You don't sit down and be like, oh, my automation should be fast. You sit down and say, my automation needs to serve the people who build it, needs to serve my customers, it needs to be better. Turns out that if you do that well, it's going to be fast, right? But it's possible to build very, very fast, very, very inhumane systems, and we should avoid that. So let's talk about some practical stuff. Okay, postmortems. How many people in this room hold no blame postmortems? Pretty good number. It needs to be everybody. You'll think about that maybe after this slide. So we hold postmortems to understand when we fail, why we failed, and what we're going to do to be better next time, and we prioritize that work. And so if you think about it through my lens, if you say, what is safety? Okay, well, it enhances our safety because we know how we respond to failure, and we try not to fail the same way, but if we do, we know what our response is, right? So that makes everybody safer. It increases our knowledge, both to the authors and the users. When we have those postmortems, if we publish them publicly, now we know, both as a team, what happens when we fail, and people who use our software know why we failed and how we're going to be better, right? So that's pretty cool. It makes us more free. Now, I know that every time I make a mistake and production goes down, what's going to happen is 24 hours later, we're going to get in a room and we're going to talk in a blameless way about what happened and how we avoid it, and then we're going to prioritize fixing it so it doesn't happen again. That makes it much, much safer to act, right? It's super liberating, right? And then finally, it increases your contentment because, again, you know that next honest evaluation, that's the side effect of whatever bad thing is going to happen to you. So it doesn't take the bad thing away, right? You still failed and it's a bummer, but you feel okay about it because you know what's going to happen. So no wonder that everybody who's ever been in a blameless postmortem culture swears by it and refuses to let that be removed from their life. Does anybody who has postmortems want them to stop? No. Not a single hand, right? Because it's fundamentally more humane. Continuous integration, right? This is ensuring that the work that you put in gets integrated to a mainline regularly and that the tests always pass, right? How many people do CI? How many people want to stop doing CI? Right? Not a single hand. Why? Well, I would argue it makes you safer. You can always commit and start a new branch. It increases knowledge. It provides direct feedback about health of the branch and of the code base, both to the author and to the people who use it. It makes you more free. It frees you up to work on new things. You don't have to be so worried about whether or not the code base is stable when you start new work. You don't have to worry about whether it'll integrate back into the mainline because you're going to integrate it back into the mainline all the time, right? And that makes you more content. Even when the code base is going wrong, you know what the backstop is, you know how it's going to communicate to you, and you know what you have to do to fix it. It's fundamentally more humane. Continuous delivery takes it one step further. All that code in the mainline should be ready to ship anytime you need it. How many people do CD? How many people want to stop doing CD? Nobody, I think. So here's an example. Safety. You got to react to new situations. How easy is that? Customer needs a new feature. How do we fix it? We go through CI, test turn green, I click the ship it button, goes to customer. That's awesome. Pretty safe, right? It's a pretty straight path. Knowledge focuses our actions on that moment of external value, and it lets us bring that to customers. We know at any time if what we have to do is fix a bug or ship a feature, we can do that whenever we want to. Our customers know it, and it increases everyone's knowledge about how the system works. It allows us to act in the best interest of our customer, right? So it gives us more freedom of movement. If we have to change our minds, if priorities change, you don't have to worry about refactoring a bunch of long-lived branches and a bunch of other things, or worrying about long-lived, one-off stuff at customer sites. And it makes you more content, right? It's easier to help your customers. Therefore, when you have to help a customer, you can help a customer, right? So again, no great shock. Nobody wants to go back from using a CD system. So here's where it gets a little more complicated. Let's talk about platform as a service, right? So in some situations, platforms as a service, which is like an abstraction of the whole stack. Does anybody not know what this is? Raise your hand and I'll tell you, otherwise we'll just move on. Okay, everybody knows. So safety. It's really hard to mess up deployment in the common case, right? Basically what you do, like Heroku, you just git push and it goes. That's super safe, right? And it works. Knowledge, it lets you focus in on the thing you care about and not the muck, right? You don't care about the details. And so in the sweet spot, it's really great because it lets you focus in on just the knowledge you need, right? Freedom. You can just ship. You don't have to worry about messy setup. You don't have to worry about what happens if you get hit on Oprah, right? It's all taken care of, and it's super cool. And then it makes you more content, right? It's really fast. And honestly, that contentment hit is kind of addictive because when it works, it just works, and it takes care of everything for you, and it feels really, really good. So then sometimes what happens is your system gets bigger, or it gets more safety critical, or it matters more to your business. And then this whole thing flips over. And suddenly, that system becomes difficult or impossible to debug because it's very hard to influence the muck. So if the problem that's happening isn't a problem in your code, but is instead a problem in the muck, how do you know? It's hard to see it, right? Knowledge. It abstracts away all those details from you, right? Which is okay, but it also means that you can't necessarily understand the details if you needed them, right? And most of the time you don't. If it's low criticality, low safety, no big deal. But then later it became high criticality, became high safety. It was less good. Freedom. It tends to focus all of your solutions to the focal point of the abstraction, and in this case, that abstraction is deployment. So every problem becomes a deployment problem, right, in some degree or another. And then finally, if you're in this situation, you definitely don't feel content about running that system, right? That safety and knowledge lack leads to a clear and present discontentment within what you do. So a good example here was when Heroku changed their load balancing infrastructure. Does anybody remember that? So they changed their load balancing infrastructure in a subtle way, and it changed the way that they routed things to particular applications. And it had a huge impact on some of the really large customers that ran on Heroku, and it took them a long time for those customers to debug it. And then they had to go write a big blog post about how they were calling out Heroku on their dirty, dirty lies, right? And that sucks for Heroku. It sucked for the customer. And I think it's an example of how that abstraction turned on them, right? They loved that abstraction in the beginning, and of course they did. It's so good. How many people have used a pass like that? And it was awesome, right? And then it wasn't sometimes. Or it stays awesome. It depends on where you go. And my point by calling it out this way is to say that this too is a slider, right? It's not that these rules apply all the time uniquely in one way. Sometimes they do. Postmortems, CI, CD, that stuff's good. Sometimes they don't, and it's okay. So you got to look at your situation, understand what you're building, understand the systems you're working on, and use this lens to make good decisions. So to wrap up, you got to do three things if you want to change anything. You got to change what people believe. You have to change the systems by which they work, and that helps change the behaviors of those human beings. And as the people who build those systems, we are fundamentally the best people to influence those behaviors and beliefs, right? Other people can talk about what we should believe. We're the only ones who can build the system that actually makes sure that we believe it. You got to start with your own teams and your own product. You need to sit down and talk to each other about what you're building, why you're building it. You got to talk about what you believe will build great outcomes, and then you have a shot at actually getting them. You got to have a mission that's bigger than the software you produce. You got to have those beliefs and build your org structure that way. You got to think to yourself about how to build humane systems, right? The goal of automation is to enhance the safety, contentment, knowledge, and freedom of the authors and users of that software. And if you hold that in your head while you build those systems, I believe this is what will happen. Collaboration will go up. Your communication with your teams will go up. The trust that you have in each other will be real. The products you build will be better. The authority people feel will be real authority. It won't just be an absence of it. And the inclusiveness of our communities and of each other rises. And if you think about the impact this has, if our jobs get better, if our day-to-day life get better in some way, we spend 8 or more hours a day doing just this all the time. That's more time than we spend with the people we love the most. And so if we can make that better for each other and for our teams, the impact that has isn't just on us and our immediate family, it's on everybody those people touch too. So finally, some parting wisdom from Thich Nhat Hanh, which is, if you're happy, you cannot be a victim of your happiness. But if you're successful, you can be a victim of your own success. And so I propose that leaving here, what we should be is very successful and very happy. And we can do that by holding in our minds that we build these systems fundamentally for each other, for the people who follow us, and for the people we love. Thank you.